the man in front of you, I feel like really doesn't need an introduction if you have any sort of experience in the MBTI community, but I will introduce him. This is Dr. Dario Nardi. He has been on my show before. I've done a LinkedIn Live with him. There's so many different topics that I feel like he just needs to weigh in on. There's like, what does Dario think about this? What does he think about this? Like, there's always like, he is sort of like that Merlin character that he's got all the wisdom. And, one thing about him being, I would consider him influencer in the MBTI community, is that he's very generous with his time. So this interview that we're going to do is going to be something that is unexpected, because we're actually going to go backwards. We're going to use our SI and go back in time to a book that Dario wrote called The 8 Keys to Self-Leadership: From Awareness to Action. And I think, dare I say, it's probably his best book. I mean, we have Neuroscience of Personality, which is probably his most groundbreaking book, and his newest book, The Magic Diamond, which kind of plays into all the stuff that he's written throughout his career. But I really like 8 Keys to Self-Leadership for me personally, because it is the most concise and actionable book that you could possibly write on MBTI. I use it for my coaching. I always reference it. It's probably my most highlighted MBTI book that I have. I mean, it's also probably because I'm just a super Dario fanboy that I've read it. So I've read all his stuff. But I just want to talk about it for why people this should be one of the staples for MBTI 101 as you're going through understanding and kind of answering that question of, okay, I know my type. What do I do about it? So Dario, thanks for being on with me for like the third or fourth time we've interviewed.
Yeah, my pleasure, absolutely. And it's a delight to go back to the book. When it came out, it was at a time that Telos Publications, I was not the publisher, I was just a writer and a publisher doing it, didn't really have the capacity to market it, I think. And I certainly didn't have the capacity to market it, to understand that ultimately it is like a coaching handbook. For me, there was a little bit of like a competitive desire to do it. And I felt I was in the right place. And it was really the first book that I did that was entirely mine. And the culmination, I mean, I did booklets before, but I didn't do a book. So that's sort of exciting for me as an author. And it was a culmination of listening for a number of years to people in the type community, what we might call sort of the old guard of people who've been working in type from like the 1970s through, most of them are retired today, but some are around. What are the definitions of the functions? And not trying to have like logical definitions, not to type people and put them into boxes, but for the purpose of understanding type development. And there was a wonderful group led by Steve Myers, who is today a Jungian scholar. But at that time, he was just bringing people together to discuss, like, what do we know about the 8 functions? Like, how do we want to work with that? So there were lots of people in that group online. It was like a forum. It had Lenore Thompson and Danielle Poirier and Roger Pierman, and I don't think Linda Behrens participated that much, but she was in it. I was there. There were many other people whom I'm not mentioning. There's a long list. And everybody was able to come up and talk for a week or two and offer stuff to discuss about the functions. And there were really lots of types represented. So it was really great. And I got the impetus that I had just been listening and using that sort of like magic INTJ skill, which is to take 10 sort of vague data points and converge on like a best fit solution. And that's what the book represents. Like I don't think there was really any perspective on that form that was left out. So there's a few places like with Gary Hartzler, I disagree a little bit about introverted sensing, but for the most part, it's there. And then I personally was in a place, I was in my mid-30s, I'd already been studying type for almost 15 years, using type as a teacher to develop workshops, like all of that. And I really wanted to like capture what it is that I had learned, and was also wondering, like, is this it? Like, is this the end of type? Not the end of Jung, of course, because Jung is about mostly more than type. But is this it? And so I heard, and this is the secret story. I heard that Gary and Margaret Hartzler were coming out with a book on developing the 8 functions, which is still out there, and people know about it, and it's a popular booklet. And I just heard from a little bird through the grapevine it was coming out in 3 weeks or 4 weeks. I think it was about 3 or 4 weeks. And so I just took upon myself. I said, you know what? I'm going to put out a book on the same topic, and it's going to be a book. And I can just say, yeah, I've been working on this all along, which in a sense my intuition had been like absorbing all of this data and discussion. And I actually just stepped out then of prof type, as it was called, and said, I'm taking a break. And I wrote day and night for 2 weeks. And then I edited for a week. And after 3 weeks, the book was done. And it went to the professional editor. It really was an exercise in introverted intuition. Like the night before each day, I would ask myself, like, what roughly am I probably going to work on next? And I'd sleep on it and wake up and I write for like 3 or 4 hours. And then I would go to the gym and I would eat and I would take a nap. And just for the nap, I would ask myself, what am I going to be writing for the rest of the day after the nap? And I just repeated. And I don't have any obligations those weeks. Like it was just a great, like January, February, I could do anything. And there the book was born. And I tell this story in part because I'm describing a process, of like setting up your intuition and using it in a certain way. Or I want to say but relying upon it in a certain way. And so that's what really the book is about. It has many dozens of exercises. I think, what is it, like 25 times, like there's 200 exercises, something like that, 180 exercises for developing each of the 8 functions. And tiered into like basic, intermediate, and advanced. So no matter where you are, and in fact, we don't even need to have a specific theory of type dynamics. No. We can just go through each function and say like, hey, where am I? And do I want or need to develop this, and like go through and like start with the basic ones. And I think most people can do the basic ones unless it's like really outside their wheelhouse. So-called like 7th and 8th function stuff.
Right.
And then, they can work up to doing the intermediate and advanced. And of course, this was still working tangentially with Linda Behrens and Chris Kyler and some other people, was able to pass around the material and also get feedback about, how does this go? But mostly it was just the intuition, just like coming out of my brain and going onto the page. And each of the exercises, as you know, was really short. I mean, there are 2 lines to like a paragraph. And they're all just like pieces of a puzzle. And as you work on it, it will slowly build up into something that I don't want to say defines the function, but is all the skills that embody the function. It's like a function is this abstract, energetic process, but we need to actually have skills to embody it. They're like specific to us, to our society. Yeah. And that's what it does.
Yeah. I think that's embodied is what it is. And just let me show the audience. This is the book. It's 195 pages. So it's like, it's not overwhelming. It's not the magic diamond, it's not the magnum opus of Dario's work, his work, but it is a good reference. It's like, it's always next to me. So that's how I use it. So this word embodied you use is because when you say like introverted intuition is a function that can you wield it? The question for me is always like, can you wield it? Or can you embrace it? Or can you access it? And I think all the functions, at least on the introverted side, are ones that like, can you train it to work better? Or can you just be more aware of how it operates? And I think your book is more of not a prescription, but here's what it would look like to be an introverted thinking, to use introverted thinking at an advanced level. Not like, how to become an advanced user of it, but I almost is like, because we know through type development, you can't be an expert at all the functions. You can notice it, or you could imagine what it would be like. But am I describing that right? Because I feel like you just can't become an expert NI user just by working on it. What do you say to that?
I think somebody said it really great once early on. I think in writing a review of the book, they're like, it would take 2 lifetimes to go through half the book or something. And,
Okay.
because it's sure a person can turn to an advanced activity and exercise and think like, oh, I can try and wing this, but really it's one of those things, like I learned as an engineer, that every lower division course that you take is a building block upon which the upper division courses are built. You take a sequence like static and dynamics 1, 2, 3 over the course of a year and a half or whatever it is, and you can't just jump to the higher level one. Some people may feel that at times, and there's some work by Roger Pearman on emotional intelligence that suggests when something is out of preference, we can develop skills like at an intermediate level that are out of sequence, that are just because, like the people we grew up with or some special circumstance or like what we learn in school, but it still like lacks often the foundation that makes it work really well. And is like at times I find myself using introverted feeling in a way that can fool the NFPs and SFPs around me, and feeling I'm like them, and I am in a sense, but I'm also missing some of the foundational stuff, and I'm certainly not using it all the time or with the smoothness or confidence that it can have. Nonetheless, I think people will be pleasantly surprised as they go through. They're going to start, maybe something is a third function, and they start to go through it, and they're like, yeah, actually, I relate to all of these basic ones. Like maybe as a teenager and young adult, I actually been doing all of these things, maybe not so consciously, but to see it. I also think in the vein of like personality hacker, they talk about, for a lot of young people, like, hey, go back and work on your second function, your auxiliary, because you're probably not using it to its full potential. And there's like, you can move from like sort of basic intermediate to at least solid intermediate level of use. You won't use it like the dominant function, but like is a resource right there, you can develop it pretty easily. And I feel that's very much the case with the dominant in particular. Like I've watched an ENTJ friend of mine do business, and every moment, every step of the way, I understand what he's doing. I don't do that. And I wonder, like, no, but I understand what he's doing.
Right.
And I'm like, I could probably train myself to do that. I'm not really that interested in doing it, but I get it. Mm-hmm. And I think we can reach that point in a function, as opposed to being like, oh my, either like, what are you doing? Or the very well titled classic type book, I'm not crazy, I'm just not you. Mm-hmm. Although there are crazy versions of every type.
Oh yeah.
So I really just wanted it to be something, and I did. I taught a course for a number of years at UCLA. It was like a 1 unit we called Fiat Lux, Let There Be Light. And they would just, we did an introduction, and then we just did one function every week. It's like a course of 20 students.
That's nice.
And they would just pick wherever they wanted to start in the chapter and reflect on where was it in their life, do 2 or 3 of the exercises, that was their homework, and then we'll discuss. And they wrote a little paper to go with it, short, like 2-page paper. And there were no boxes. Mm-hmm. I mean, everybody had a clear sense by the time they finished the course, like what were their strengths and weaknesses.
Yeah.
So I think that's a great way of approaching type. And I also think that, what can happen on the internet is there's a lot of discussion about type or about type. Like a meta discussion.
Meta discussion, yeah.
Right. But there's no actual, like, let's try and do it. Like if a person thinks like, oh, so-and-so, are they like ENTP or ESTP? And I'm like, well, let's see them try and pull off one of those two, like extroverted intuiting or extroverted sensing. Like go through the activities. Person is wondering, am I INFP or INFJ? Mm-hmm. Go through the activities. It can even be used for self-discovery. Which ones sit more naturally with you. And finally, I've continued to develop, I think notice, sometimes accidentally develop, sometimes more deliberately develop aspects of even my own dominant function that I didn't know were like a facet of the function.
Right.
So that's, I think, especially for younger people, they can be like, oh yeah, there is this other side. So maybe because of the, the way they grew up, they weren't able to use intuiting, like the family discouraged that, they didn't have friends to connect with. So they're like, oh, this is like, not just I'm an intuiting type, but like, this is the fullness of what intuiting can look like.
That's
In
beautiful.
very specific ways. Yeah.
Yeah, that must just kill you, some of the discussions about like based on quotes people have said, or like in interviews, like that proves it, ENFJ, and you're like, well, let's see them do that. Like they can do it. I've written a book. And speaking of that, so I want to get into some of this because the question's always like, so what now? I've been typed this way, or I think I took some assessment. This is what I am. Let's go through it. And one of the ones I wanted to start with in my book, in the hard cover or the physical copy, it's page 31. I think it's a little bit different on the PDF, but it's developing extroverted sensing. And for the INTJ, it's our inferior function. And I have this highlighted because at the beginning of this book, you kind of give a little tally sheet. And I scored like, I'm not quite introductory, but I'm at the basic. I do the basic exercises. So I flipped to the basic exercises of extroverted sensing. And one of the things is on page 33, it says, learn the culture. So it's more about getting immersed. So here's what Dario writes. Every context has a lingo, a manner, and culture. Do not force yourself to adopt the culture or wear something that doesn't suit you. A wannabe can be an object of ridicule. Simply remain open to absorbing what comes up. You will absorb much of the culture just by being around others. Eventually, you will assume the culture naturally. Okay, that's one way to embody extroverted sensing. On the next page, you have one that says, immerse yourself. And this is probably the crux of what I would say is SE, is this immersion in the environment. So you write, take in all the rich details of the tools and environments around you: colors, shading, brightness, texture, gradients, granularity. Don't compare or analyze, just see the richness. To heighten this effect, do some deep relaxation or heavy exercise, and then open your eyes and look around. Everything will seem more vibrant and real. What do you think?
Yeah, so one of the things that came out from the cognitive processes assessment at Keys to Cognition with Mina Barmani is helping me so much to analyze that, is that there really is a difference between a basic and an advanced use of a function. Like that's a legitimate statistical thing over tens of thousands of people. And so what does that mean? So Jung called it concrete abstract, not to be confused with sensing intuiting. Maybe we can call it passive and active.
Right.
And so the basic exercises tend to be things which are more passive in nature. So the one after about immersing yourself is about staying in context. So this is a classic tell with ENFPs and ENTPs in particular, is they're constantly jumping outside of the context. They're referencing things that have nothing to do in the sensor's mind, especially extroverted sensor, with what's in front of us right now.
Right.
Of course, to the extrovert intuiting type, there's like all these things that are, I'm going to say, like metaphors or analogies. But staying in the context is just this very like, you're not trying to change the context or be dynamic or something like that. It's just like noticing what's there and staying with it. So like if you're surfing, stick to surfing. You're there, there's the ocean, there's the weather, there's the board, there's the techniques, there's the wave, the waves, the ocean has its own like whole thing. And when you stick with something, you begin to have, especially the repetition part of it, not in terms of practice, but in just immersing, you begin to learn how to become one with the wave.
Right.
And it's that kind of thing. Not that there isn't technique or something along with it too, because we don't use the functions in isolation. But this is why, even, and it's great that you mentioned this, because even though I talk about basic, intermediate, and advanced, there's also three, with each function, three like super introductory, we'll call them like level 0 exercises. And those are just like how to follow sensory data.
Right.
How to identify risks and limits. And then like just this idea of seizing the moment.
Right.
And seizing the moment can be very small. We always think of this as like a big thing. It is just the classic example is that for those people who've been out, most people have been out to a club at some moment. You probably learned, if you've had any fun at a club, that the wrong thing to do is when you notice something to stop and debate what you should do next or the meaning of something or whatever it is. Just like do a gut check. I mean, this is for the NTJs and SFPs. So all understand this in particular. Just do a gut check. Do you like it or do you not like it? Or do you not really care? If you like it and it's not crossing the limit of what's like appropriate, like mean or something, and I mean appropriate in a very basic way, mean, not mean, just say it or just do it. You know, say, oh, those are like, that's like, those are really great shoes. Or like, oh, do you want a drink?
Right.
Like, it's just like completely normal activity. Just respond in that very like seize the moment way.
Yeah.
And of course for the SPs listening, they're like, duh. But there's you know, and so I really believe that the level 0 ones are applicable to every type. So even if say, you're an INTP or ISFJ or whatever, you know, take a look at the level 0 exercises. And then,
absolutely.
Yeah, and then build up from there.
Yeah, and you thought popped into my head about the staying in context, about the extroverted sensing as a because you had written before that extrovert intuiting is transcontextual. And I think that SE types or extroverted sensing types don't need to give you more context than what we're talking. We're only talking about what we're talking about. Like, and I think that there's you can tell very easily with types that feel like if I don't bring in this thing over here, you're not going to understand what I'm saying. Like I have to give you the background context or other context. Maybe that's an SI thing, but SE people are very good at being straightforward. I think, like the straightforward speakers.
Yeah, because all you need to actually know is right in front of you. I think for NE folks, there's a certain, like, they feel it's boring if you don't bring in other stuff because they don't actually stay with the context. And I think a great example is going to the gym for many years on and off with an ENFP who would literally not allow himself to feel the sensation of exercise. He's just like, oh, I cut that part off from myself so I don't feel, you know, uncomfortable or unpleasant. And I'm thinking, like, first of all, that's not healthy because your body's going to give you signals about what would be like a safe level of exercise. And then it sort of spoiled it for me because I would enter the zone, you know, like a 1 hour like circuit training. And I'm enjoying the feeling of being in the zone. And the ENFP is talking about something that has absolutely nothing to do with now or anything. I'm like, can I just enjoy myself?
Right.
So I think that even when we think, oh, it's our inferior function or something, that when we begin to look at these activities, these embodiment activities, that actually we're often doing stuff, or if we start doing stuff related to our tertiary and inferior, we're going to really be cool with it.
Yeah.
I think that, you know, like the base, as it gets a little bit more long, like then it's going to be like, I don't know if I want to go skydiving, but
yeah, maybe.
Yeah, you know what I mean? But it's but there's like that basic level that can be really very rewarding for people. And it's a great way to, you know, Jung emphasized, like he had this dynamic sort of almost hydraulic understanding of the psyche and this concept called libido, not just meaning in a sexual sense, but in an energetic sense. And that we actually, even though we have a comfort zone in what we do, in order to really recharge, that we need to go into our opposite. Not like in a really stressful way, but it's the kind of like going on vacation for a while. It's like the ENFP who discovers like every couple of months, they just need to have a cleaning frenzy. And they're going to spend the weekend all by themselves cleaning their apartment, house, whatever, like getting everything in order, throwing things away that they don't need. And it just feels like weirdly, like really delightful and relieving.
Yeah.
And then they're done with that. And they had their me day for the 2 months and their ESTJ cleaning day. and they actually feel really re-energized. So I really believe that that's not only important, but as people get older, like midlife and after that, because Jung was primarily described as being, having a framework for midlife and afterward. He wasn't like focused on teenagers, for example. Most of his books, all of that, the culture even is addressing those questions. So it can be very relevant whether you're wondering like, oh, I'm this type, like what is my potential? As somebody who's young, like 15-year-old reader versus somebody who's like 55 and being like, oh yeah, there are still these facets I can work on.
Yeah. And one thing I don't want to drift and go to NE, but one of the things about this book is it really gives you a definition or a language to orient yourself towards. So it's like, you don't know the thing that you do is called anything. And I think that's the most beautiful thing about type. And then you can go, oh, that's like my introverted sensing, that process that I go through of looking backwards or to, reflect on a standard or use a predictability. That's SI. And then once you see that, now you have a thing to work on or throttle down or throttle up. So that's just like a side thing I wanted to make clear, is like you have a language to describe yourself finally. Oh, okay, that's my NI going a little bit berserk right now. And I think like we keep talking smack about NE users because I think they're the most fun, but they can realize what they do can be off-putting, or they can see, okay, I've been talking for 5 minutes straight. I'm going to dial it back. My NE is going too much. Maybe? Yes?
Yeah, no, I mean, that's true. I mean, with the introverts, because the main function is introverted, if we overdo it, usually it's our auxiliary that they're overdoing, or we just hurt ourselves because we're being too like secretive or whatever it is.
Right.
With extroverts, right, it's like other people are part of the thinking process. We are part of the objects of the extrovert's environment. So it's I mean, it's certainly there's, and I don't dwell a lot upon dysfunction. Towards the end of the book, there are a couple of chapters that are on like, the 4 dragons of type development. And also giving advice. Like there's a whole chapter on like lookalikes, for example, when you see this and when you see that. And I also didn't want to try and just reduce it to one thing. Like saying like extroverted thinking is about logically organizing the environment. I feel that there's many ways to embody it, and they all sort of like revolve around something, some center point that's sort of invisible, and just to allow us to develop whichever aspects we need to.
Right. What's funny about you in particular and others that have been in type for so long is that you're less likely to come to a real conclusion about something. And I feel like I think it's just Dunning-Kruger effect, but like there's a lot of that type discussion that's like, oh, you did this, you're that. Like there's such confidence. There's such confidence about knowing the types, but then as you've studied it for so long, you're like, that might be that, but we're not sure. We need to do more digging.
Yeah, and it's not like I'm disinterested or something, although I certainly, people ask, as I am here at a new office place of my client in Norway, there are new people working there, and some of them have been introduced to type and some haven't. And so they're sort of asking, like one at the company dinner was asking me like, oh, what type do you think I am? And I already taken in that she was probably ESTJ preferences. And even then, it's like, it's not my job.
Right.
It's not my role to tell a person what their type is, even if I'm an expert or whatever. I can put out some words. I learned a lot from ENFPs and embodied in terms of skills. And I think this is why sometimes people can be confused, like, is this person this type or that type? Because they just pick up stereotypical skill. But one thing ENFPs do is they just throw out certain words and see how a person responds to them in terms of their nonverbal body language. And
give an example. Give an example.
Like NASCAR. So there's like, how does a person respond to that? Because first of all, I want to know, like, is a person going to have a negative reaction to that? And a lot of NFs actually really give away their values when you just throw out some things that are like, In politics, for example, I don't have to say anything about politics. I can say simply things that are around politics.
Right.
And the NF so obviously gives away their biases because they have a whole like painting in their mind, like a mural or montage of all of the things that are associated with all of the other things. So I can just say something like NASCAR, and is there a reaction or not to it? Or just in terms of words, like people relate to certain words. You know, if you're talking to an ESTP and it's like, yeah, let's just like find a winning outcome for both of us. I mean, what ESTP is going to be against that?
No.
You know, where are they going to say, you know, this is going to get pretty complicated? Those are not winning words to use with an ESTP.
No. No.
So it's just like you throw out some certain words. So even in the exercises, I mean, that was something I was already familiar with from neurolinguistic programming. But like there's just words, and then behind the words are actually processes. And processes, I mean that in a very broad sense of like skill, because every skill is really a process. There's like the thing you do before you do it. Mm-hmm. Like in writing a chapter for a book, like there are things I do before I start writing, and then there's like the preliminary, like in a story, and then there's the process itself, and then there's the closing stuff. And not that it's all mapped out, but there's like it's a process,
right?
You know, I mean, there's just, you know, like if you're a songwriter, you have your own way of writing songs. Some other songwriter has their own way. Mm-hmm. And that's the words then tap into processes and the reactions that people give. And that's something that I learned. And that therefore I put in the book. That's like an introverted feeling kind of thing.
Right. Well, good transition, because I was literally sitting on page 144 in the book, which is, I want to talk about introverted. Let's do one more example of some of the exercises. Introverted feeling is, I always like to call it like, I think it's important. I think you think it's your favorite or the most important, but it's the motivation and for most people, I think. And in your introductory exercises, your first thing you say is get reacquainted with yourself. So just identify how you feel right now. How do you feel about how you feel? Perhaps you're sad at the moment, but happy overall. Also identify what you believe. Perhaps select something that is important to you today. What do you believe about what you believe? And then in the second exercise, it's evaluate your values and life for congruency. And I think being congruent is probably the most apt word for what FI does. Is like, am I being congruent? Is this action I'm about to do? Is this thing I'm about to say? Is this cause I'm about to support congruent with my compass? So you say, examine all aspects of your life for congruence between your daily choices and your beliefs. Walk through one day in which at each step you listen to your conscious, asking yourself, how well does this agree with my beliefs? And there are types, like I have done a lot of work with ENTJs where this is a question that they have never posed to themselves. I don't know. And it's not like a negative thing. It's just like, oh, I guess I've never thought about that. And I see, like, if you pick this up and you're looking at it as an ENTJ, you'd be like, holy crap, like, can I even answer that question? And that's an intro exercise. What do you think?
Yeah, you know, it's one of those things where maybe the intro exercises aren't that easy for some people. Some of it, I think, is also cultural. You know, there's maybe not a lot of opportunities. Maybe sometimes it comes up in reading novels at the end of high school or in college in English class. How does the character feel about how they feel? I found really what fed that section, that particular exercise, was doing music on stage and playing and singing. And I knew I needed to get to a place that I felt, in order to play effectively, because I'm not very good with memorizing or technique or something like that. Like I'm a complete, well, certainly then, you know, amateur. I couldn't read music. I can't memorize worth anything. But I do have some decent improvisation skills, and I can get into an emotional space. And one of the things that I learned, and I remember when I was doing some songs, and one of them is sad, and then afterwards, I was just so happy because I was effectively really actually sad.
Okay.
So I was happy about being sad.
Yeah, no, I get that.
Sadness was what the song needed. Because like, if you don't show up in the song and you're just like playing the notes or singing the lyrics about something that's supposed to be sad and you're not actually sad, then what are you doing?
Yeah.
Like, is I mean that's my like introverted feeling reaction.
Mm-hmm.
So it was really, I do remember that night was really like, I knew in theory and to see it play out in practice that I was genuinely happy about being sad. So it was sort of like a meta emotion. And similar, I had another experience like a year later where I essentially, an INFP friend gave some group of us instructions. I won't give the context.
Mm-hmm.
To just change how we felt in order to get through the process we were going through. And I'm like, okay, I understand. Because he's like, if you focus on something negative, like you're just going to feel more negative. And if you focus on something positive, like you're going to, he's just, but he didn't say it quite that way. He's just like, change how you feel everything will follow. And I'm like, okay, I'll be happy. And I found that part of myself and drew it out.
Mm-hmm.
And that was cool. And then the INTP with me like had a horrible experience because she really said, I don't understand what you mean. How do I do that?
Okay.
It's
Yeah.
yeah. So maybe, right, or not all the exercises are that easy. And then I think that really tells us these are more than skills, that at least, type development is a real thing, that we do have meaningful differences. If I hear from another, and I don't mean to pick out this type, but it's the only type that I tend to hear this from, the ENTP, who says, I'm great at all 8 functions. I'm like, no, you're not. You're really great at meta perspective.
Mm-hmm.
And you can imagine and sort of like activate some skills relative to all 8 functions for like 2 minutes. And then it's done. You can't really do introverted sensing unless you actually do it for a while.
I see. Okay.
Right. You know what I mean? And
Right.
it's like, if you're not actually one with the wave, or
Mm-hmm.
you got that for like 3 seconds, like that doesn't count. I mean, that's extroverted sensing for 3 seconds,
Right.
but it's not a life of extroverted sensing.
Right. That's so funny. Okay.
Yeah. And I do want to emphasize then that it's all of these skills, there's this sort of framework in NLP, because a lot of these are like modeling exercises. Basically, I just looked at what the skills were that people have typically to embody their type or their function. And then, give some descriptions around those to help people model those. And the best way, if you want to say, let's say you and I want to develop more extroverted intuiting, which I think is great, actually, because there's nothing worse than the situation where like an ENFP starts telling a story and the INTJ is like, wait, I don't understand. Stop, back up. And the ENFP is like, no, you're smart. Why do you need me to back up and give you a whole explanation? Just wait like literally 30 seconds and you'll understand what I'm talking about. Like, I'm trying to tell the story the fun way. And the ENFP is right. And it's just like, let's go for a ride and be cool about it. And so like, okay, let's develop some extroverted intuiting. And it's really great then to not only have the book, but to have some friends, the INTP for introverted thinking, or ISTP, or whatever it is, extroverted feeling, an ISFJ, like hang around that person while you're holding the book. Well, maybe not extreme. And you'll really then see a great example and understand and get to practice it.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's the third part, which is like, are you doing ethically and ecologically? Which does not mean recycling and like, trees and birds. I mean, like, does it fit with who you are and what your purpose is? And it's not, we don't need to develop all 8 functions. That's not what our purpose is.
Right.
But if you played video games, like the point of the character class that you pick is to not be all character classes.
Yeah.
A really awesome version of your class.
Right.
And that's
a great analogy.
Yeah. Character classes appeal to so much to people in so many games.
Mm-hmm.
There is an archetypal element, and so to honor that archetype while still growing. I would also encourage people to actually read the last couple chapters of the book, even if they otherwise use it, because Roger Pearman told me, he's like, oh, you can write a whole other book based on the last 2 chapters. And 15 years later, I did, and it's called The Magic Diamond. It's still there. There's hopefully some useful stuff there.
Yeah, you do. I think you do use one of the same images with like the like align, refine, apply, refer to. I think you use the same image from all the way back then. So Roger was right. Good for him. So it turned out to be another book. So let me just show this one more time. So I implore my audience to, if you've seen, any of Dario and I's interviews, you see my stuff on LinkedIn or YouTube, I would get this book. It's like, I don't know if you could see, but it's just like highlighted like crazy. You might be able to see it, but like I just have so many highlights in here. I think that if you're on that cusp of like, okay, I've done the assessments online, I've watched the YouTube videos, but I need to go to that next level of like working on myself, and you want to like kind of do it in maybe more of it doesn't even have to be a programmatic way. Like Dario was saying, you can just open it up and you can go like, all right, let's see what I can do there. And then I have like check boxes where I've checked off things as I've gone along. Like some stuff I don't have any highlights because I either didn't understand it or I like could not figure out how to do it, which is just a personal thing. But a lot of these I've tried to do. So
and I think I love what you said, because if you're one of those types that is like, yeah, I don't want an agenda, I would just say like randomly open to a page and read a couple of the exercises and then ruminate on it and sort of think about where can this appear in my life? Not like this in a specific way, but that like INFP, like I'm going to ruminate and then I'm going to create space in my life for something to emerge.
Right.
And that it can also be used that way, and that's it's sort of cool. Nobody told me that they didn't understand the exercises. I'm curious. We'll have to discuss.
Well, like one of them was just like merging symbolic images. Like I like symbolism and stuff like that. So it's the advanced use of NI. I was just like, how am I like in terms of, and it's a long explanation in there. So I'm like, how do I do that? So I'm like, I just got to read it again. It was one of those ones that I didn't immediately grasp the use of it, but that's the point of challenging yourself with an advanced exercise. Like, let's see how good you are at it.
And I would say in writing that, I was, that's how NI works. At times I wrote things that I don't actually understand what I'm writing until years later. And I didn't understand until like 15 years later or whatever. I'm like, oh, right. Like I can go on like a shamanic drumming journey and encounter my spirit animal. And that actually is like a great example of what that's about.
Okay.
But I didn't know that at the time. I just had like, I'm just like letting stuff come out of my brain, my fingers onto the page.
And for my audience, I'm going to put like Dario and I are going to whip up maybe like a little sample page or a couple pages to take like a sneak peek into the 8 keys so you can see what it's actually about. And I will be putting all the info to buy this book from Amazon or wherever Dario decides he wants to sell it from in the description and then on the comments on LinkedIn. Perfect. Yeah. So Dario, I appreciate you as always. You're one of the most generous people in the community. I know that, you could easily charge for interviews, but so far you're not. So thank you for letting me steal some time from you.
This is my pleasure, and it was lots of fun. I tried to live without you. Just can't get you.